Is Sokovia being set up to become Latveria in the Marvel Cinematic Universe? I just finished watching WandaVision this weekend, and I thought it was amazing. These characters were underserved in the main movies, and yeah, some people were disappointed that they didn't merge the MCU with the X-Men mutant universe in this TV show itself, but guys, I just always thought they'd do something that important in a theatrically released movie, like, I don't know, Doctor Strange 2, Multiverse of Madness. Multiverse is in the title. So I think WandaVision was sort of a prelude to that, setting up how Wanda can be in such a position that she's so magically powerful she can literally break realities. Before this, she was just the weird hex girl who can give people nightmares and move things with her mind. That they needed to set that up because they didn't put in all the mutant background to it before that due to the different continuities. They needed that set up, and this was more of a character piece, which they needed because we didn't have a lot of focus on these characters before. So, yeah, that would have been fun, don't get me wrong, but still, it's like, I don't feel cheated. This was set up, and we're getting that in the not too distant future. You get the sense they're moving towards that. So some people they need to complain. It's like, what? Nothing fundamentally was taken away. I think they're moving in that direction. Like with some of the other movies before this, such as Age of Ultron, they'd release a tie-in short-run comic prelude to Age of Ultron, or Road to Age of Ultron as a limited-run comic. Well, in this case, instead of a tie-in comic, we got a tie-in TV show. WandaVision felt almost like prelude to Multiverse of Madness, Road to Multiverse of Madness, and I was fine with that. But again, I thought it was a great character piece for Wanda and Vision. I really felt for them, and it's been 4 or 5 days now, and I'm still left a crying mess over it. Vision with his Pinocchio thing, like Data from Star Trek, how, well, like, Ultron, his evil brother, is like the bad version of how artificial intelligence can turn out, like Terminator and stuff, and he's crazy. But it isn't necessarily bad. That Vision is the hopeful version of AI in science fiction. That what if it's something better? That AI is the child of humanity, and what if it's all of our hopes and us and our best? That AI is something nobler than us, that is that we made, that came from us, and it still seeks morality and meaning in the universe, something better. So that does all that in the comics. That Vision is this philosophical robot guy. I love that trope from the Star Trek thing, but it's a trope for a reason. That just because he's super intelligent doesn't mean he still grapples with questions about the meaning of life, the universe, and everything. That whole outsider looking in and asking, like in his first thing with Age of Ultron, wow, humans are so strange. You think order and chaos are somehow opposing each other and separate, and just a different view on the universe. That holding up a mirror to ourselves things. Just the philosophical stuff, like they had the ship of Theseus discussion and it made complete sense in context. It wasn't just showing off, but it was a brilliant way to wrap that up of just, wait a minute, which of us is the original? What's going on here? What does that even mean? So everyone's happy with that. I don't have much more to add there. And oh God, Wanda, to just, of course, the focus of this is Wanda. Just, I was edge of my seat near the end because I was genuinely worried that they were going to go down a Dark Phoenix route with this character to make her truly evil. And they still might, but I don't think they're quite going with that. But for a while, I was afraid they would write these characters out or turn them into villains so they could write them out in Multiverse of Madness. Just those scenes near the end, and Elizabeth Olsen sold this so well, of just that she is unraveling. Her eyes are all over, looking all over the place furtively. She sounds half there going, I am a good person. No, I was keeping you safe. She is falling apart. And they're just grappling with, well, maybe I'm not a good person. And what am I trying to do here? And just the best characters in the comics are villains who turn into good characters. or good characters who turn into villains for logical reasons due to logical disagreements. It's not a flip of a switch, that there's character development through logical progression. And I loved Wanda from the beginning. It's, like George R. R. Martin loved Wonder Man in the original Fantastic Four because of the whole, he was supposed to infiltrate the Fantastic Four for the bad guys, but he was so won over by their devotion to goodness, essentially, that he sacrificed his life to save them and died a hero. And that was a famous comics run, and those are always the best characters. That Wanda and Quicksilver in Age of Ultron started out as villainous characters, but you could tell they suffered and had a hard life, but they weren't bad people, and that there's goodness in them, and the heroes are like Luke seeing that there was still good in Vader. That not a great example, because that's at the end of an arc, but Black Widow, her whole thing, if you pay attention, because we haven't had her movie yet, that she explaining, well, I actually used to be this assassin, but Hawkeye saw there was something better in me, and it encouraged me to, then his faith in me was rewarded, that he thought I could be a better person than I am. And then they did that with the Maximoff twins. And just playing with that it's what George Martin said, this is a Game of Thrones channel mostly, that, it's not, oh my God, who's going to get killed off this week? But, the struggle in the human heart of seeing characters struggle to be a good person, or are they going to turn evil for logical reasons? So just, where is this character ending up on their moral arc? That is what keeps me invested, worrying about. I'm not so much worried about whether Wanda lives or dies at this point, so much as whether they turn her into a villain. Like, if they quietly wrote her out in Multiverse doing something good, I wouldn't be upset, because, actors need to leave the role after a while. But at this point, I'm more worried about her soul, if that makes sense. That, when I was rewatching Age of Ultron, when Captain America, meets the Maximoff twins, he isn't yelling at them. He says, I can tell you're suffering, but I want to believe there's good in you. And he's the one that takes them back to the other Avengers and says we have to work with them to fight Ultron, because Captain America does what's right, and he believes in people and gives patriotic speeches about the good in us, because he's so righteous. He's my favorite. But I'm just rambling here. Sorry, that was all just introduction. This is like 8 minutes of introduction. The real reason I made this video, what I said in the first line, was I finished WandaVision, and all this is just me gushing about Vision is great, Wanda's great. I thought it was great from start to finish. There are a few things they didn't get to, but I feel I'll get to in the next movie, so I'm not upset. What the one big fan theory that was rattling in my head, the one big takeaway I had from that show, other than worrying about Wanda, by the end of it, I mean, in terms of future stuff, because other people have crazy, not crazy, but just, hey, maybe they'll work on that other comics thing, which is a bit of a stretch. I was left seriously wondering, strongly suspecting, after specifically WandaVision, are they setting up Sokovia to turn into Latveria, the country ruled by Doctor Doom, main villain of the Fantastic Four? Some background if you're not familiar with the comics. Latveria is a fictional country in the Marvel Comics in the Northern Balkans, which Baron Victor von Doom rules over as this disproportionately powerful microstate. It's sort of like an evil version of Wakanda, isolated up in the Balkan Mountains, near Transylvania, though it's not in Transylvania, it's next to it. And the Latverians are just one of many small ethnic groups in the region, in the Balkans, which are this melting pot. Just another ethnic group that got stepped on over the centuries. Just another ethnic minority bouncing around between the great empires, playing out their little game there between the border regions. A lot of times they didn't even have their own country, until Doctor Doom built them up into a strong, independent state using his supervillain technologies and army of Doombots. A proud nation where the scientist would not be bound by petty morality, where the artist would not fear the censor. And while Doctor Doom literally rules Latveria with an iron fist, most Latverians genuinely like having him in charge. And that's fascinating, that the way they play it, that it's not, oh, we have to overthrow him, the Latverians will be happy. The Latverians like Doctor Doom. On the balance, they think he's doing a good job. Before Doctor Doom, they were nothing. Trampled on by everyone else in the region. And it's sort of like what Hydra was trying to do, that it's hard to take people's freedom away from them, but it's easy to make them voluntarily give up their freedoms for security. But where Hydra was trying to just stir up chaos to trick people, the Latverians already had problems, and they see Doctor Doom as their savior. He wasn't tricking, he was honest, just, I will make you strong again. And obviously there are differences if you pick apart 50 years worth of comics continuity going back and forth, but I'm talking in broad strokes, this is the story of Latveria. There are different storylines going different directions here and there, but basically. And it's also sort of reminiscent of Killmonger in the Black Panther movie. N'Jaka isn't some mustache-twirling villain. Like, those are forgettable. Do you remember the cross villain in Ant-Man 1? No. That was a good movie, but it's still just the memorable villains you kind of sympathize with. You see why they are the way they are. That Killmonger isn't just some evil person. He genuinely believes he's going to liberate oppressed people, but with raw force. And the key thing is, it's not just that he thinks he's the hero of his own story and he's doing the right thing. Key thing is, there are Wakandans who genuinely agree with him. Without manipulation, significant manipulation. Like the head of the border tribe in Black Panther is genuinely swayed to his side out of concern that, yeah, our country is facing so many growing outside threats, maybe we should embrace militarism, like he's saying, as the best way to protect it. So that's always more fascinating. It's not just, oh, here's the evil computer ruling over everyone, let's knock it out and then all will be well. It's the Latverians genuinely think Doctor Doom is good for them, that he has made their tiny nation strong. And the fun thing is that as head of state over a sovereign nation, one of Doctor Doom's most formidable powers in the comics when fighting the Fantastic Four is he's got diplomatic immunity. They can't arrest him when he attacks New York City. The most they can do is kick him out of the country, but he can just keep coming back, like under international law, like they can't prosecute him. Latveria is a sovereign country. It has an embassy that's considered sovereign international soil. That they can't, it's a revolving door that they kick him out and he comes back in and they kick him out. And Stanley, talked about a lot how he thought that was just the perfect thing when he came up in the 60s, that, well, what are you going to do? He's got diplomatic immunity and there's so much red tape, we're never going to get the bureaucrats to revoke it. So it's this game of catch and release. I really hope they work that in when Marvel gets to doing that in upcoming movies, that what are you going to do? He's the head of the country. So that's Latveria. How does Sokovia come into this? Well, while Latveria was introduced in the comics back in 1964, Sokovia was invented for the Marvel Cinematic Universe. It was invented for Avengers 2: Age of Ultron, barely 5 years ago in 2015. Dear God, before the pandemic, that seems so long ago. This wasn't that long ago that we were seeing all this new stuff. We hadn't even seen Chadwick Boseman as Black Panther yet. He came in Captain America 3. But Sokovia was first mentioned in Age of Ultron. That it didn't exist in the comics before. Now, some of you in the comments will be quick to point out that it was subsequently introduced into Marvel Comics. The main continuity, Earth 616 in the comics, but that's a separate continuity from the cinematic universe. In the comics, at this moment anyway, Latveria and Sokovia are two separate things, yes. Maybe that isn't what the movie universe is going to do. Maybe they were always planning this. and they just weren't coordinating with the comics guys, or even if they were going, well, they're different from the movies. We don't need them to do the same thing. So just different canon, different continuities. I'm talking about the movie series might condense this that way. Now, the Marvel Comics universe has a lot of fictional nations in it. Wakanda, Genosha, which is like apartheid for mutants, Madripoor, which is like a fictional version of Singapore. But specifically in Eastern Europe, the Balkans are a bit more Balkanized, with a couple more fictional countries that get involved in the storylines. It's busted up into a few more microstates. One of Latveria's neighbors it often goes to war with is Simkaria, and south of that is an impoverished country called Transia. Now, a lot of fans have been theorizing in the past 5 years that Sokovia is basically the cinematic universe's equivalent to Transia. It's their version of Transia, and they just picked a different name to make it sound cool. And they're pretty similar in descriptions, and even in some versions at least, do state that the Maximoff twins are from the country called Transia. But then why didn't they just call it Transia? I don't know. But also, mild spoilers, in the final post-credits scene to the WandaVision finale, we see what might be Wundagore Mountain. You see up in the mountains, and there's online chatter, is that Mount Wundagore? Which is a major location in the Marvel Comics universe, which is itself located in Transia. It's where the Maximoff twins are from. It's where the High Evolutionary is. So it's very possible that Sokovia is just a renamed equivalent to Transia. But is that necessarily what they've been doing, or did we just assume that? Nothing has been confirmed. So what hit me watching WandaVision that made me start to suspect that Sokovia will turn into Latveria was actually, very specifically, the flashback scene to Wanda's childhood. The night her parents died when their apartment was shelled. They mentioned that when they were introduced in Age of Ultron, how their home got bombed and they got trapped under their bed because a bomb fell in front of them that didn't go off, a bomb with Stark Industries written on it. Well, we actually see that in WandaVision, and it shows that, well, it actually happened in the middle of their family TV night, which was meant to be cute. Not the part where I'm not talking about the part where they get killed was horrifying. Even the part where it's supposed to be cute, them watching American TV, was actually kind of heartbreaking even before the bomb dropped, if that makes sense. And that's the real key of what I'm trying to say here, that it's hard to put this into words, so let me start over. That you're watching these Sokovians, and they're just this normal family unit, and they're watching TV, and you get the sense of these are normal people with love in their hearts, that these are just civilians trying to keep their heads down and not get hurt. That in this same sequence, Wanda's mother looks out the window, and there's literally militants shooting at each other in the streets. You can hear gunfire when they're watching TV out their window. That you look out the window, you can see the people shooting at each other. It's not in the distance. But they try to ignore it, because it just... And what does that say? I mean, the unspoken implication that this is happening so often that they just try to ignore it, that it's nothing special. That this is an everyday thing. And they try to escape from this bad situation, not of their own making, mentally escape from it with some sense of normalcy by having a family TV night, watching DVDs of classic American sitcoms, from like Malcolm in the Middle to Full House to Dick Van Dyke Show stuff from the 50s. That they said Wanda really likes the old cheesy Dick Van Dyke Show. Just it's fun. It's nothing ever too bad ever really happens. They get up to shenanigans, and it's silly fun, or that and Bewitched and stuff. And that really was the central thing of WandaVision. You know, like, why did her Hex create this fantasy world in the form of American sitcoms? that starts out as like this giant mystery at the beginning. It's this tragic explanation that as this child growing up in a war zone, that was her happy place. That was Candyland. That was the land of Oz. The place of dreams where nothing bad could happen is the version of reality presented in American sitcoms. Nothing too bad ever happens in them. Like when Vision points out, they're watching Malcolm in the Middle, and a roof falls on the dad, and he's like, "Didn't he just get hurt?" And she's like, "No, it's not that kind of show. No one ever really gets hurt in these. It's just fun." That says so much of it. It's this child-proofed version of reality where no one ever gets really hurt. You know, like child-proofing, where you put padding on everything that everyone is safe. And to mix my peas with potatoes here, it reminded me of something from DC Comics. Don't point all your weapons at me. I'm sorry. It reminded me of something from DC Comics, if you'll forgive me, from the Young Justice cartoon show, the criminally unpromoted by Cartoon Network Young Justice show, which thankfully has gotten a revival. That the thing, I watched that when it was premiering live, which was quite the hassle because the network didn't care about it. They were airing it out of sequence and having gaps of a month between episodes. But it was if you were there live, not marathoning it on HBO Max or something, that this slow fan theory was going of, why does Miss Martian keep saying hello Megan? And she has like this sitcom personality. And then the season 1 finale reveals, yeah, she based her conception of what humans are like, or her idealized version of humans, on, well, she said, well, Mars gets your radio TV transmissions, and I just really like this old sitcom, Hello Megan. So I modeled myself after the main character. And they're like, well, why that show? And she went, well, because Megan's problems are always solved within a half an hour. By the end of the episode, nothing ever too bad ever happens. Like, her problems are like, oh no, I tried to win the school raffle by, instead of baking 30 cookies, baking one giant cookie 30 times as big, and that turned into a problem. She gets into silly problems that get solved by the end of the episode. Because her reality was, it's this whole thing that the Martians, it depends on the canon, in their version at least, the Martians had castes, and there's like white Martians at the bottom, then green Martians, then red Martians, and as a white Martian, which do not look like humans, that they look like monsters, the white Martians are at the bottom of the social structure, and she felt ignored, and the green Martians are mean to them. So her thing was, I just pretended I was living in who wouldn't want to be this happy sitcom character where she doesn't have serious problems? And it just made me happy. So it reminded me of that, of this was Wanda's happy place. That instead of growing up in this blood-soaked country where my parents got killed, why can't life be like these American sitcoms? And not the part where they die, not the other stuff, just that moment of realization when you're seeing the little girl and they're in a war zone and their faces light up. And it reminds me of like movies where there's this famous movie clip where they show Looney Tunes to a bunch of prisoners in a jail, and they're laughing ecstatically because it's something really to brighten their day, and just the simple joy of laughter when things are really bad. So just, I know I'm all over the place, and this is stupid and hard to verbalize. Just, it got me, that it clicked with me in that moment, seeing how happy they were and just in awe of, it's the Dick Van Dyke Show, but like, people are getting shot outside their window. It is literally a war zone. Just that whole thing of how people who are suffering or scared can, at least temporarily, escape into the fantasy world of television. You know, like, we're science fiction fans, we're comic book fans with WandaVision, or like The Witcher, Westeros shows. Yeah, this is how we escape from the humdrum and sometimes scary stuff in our regular life. And for her, it was the American sitcom, because, you know, like, people die in the comics and in hard sci-fi things. Like, people don't really get hurt in sitcoms. And that's their mental escape for their mental health, and that's not a bad thing. mean, it can be a bad thing if you overdo it, but that this was this little beacon of hope for this little girl, that their hopes and dreams of this is what the world should be like when she's literally living in a war zone. And just the whole thing really got to me and hammered home in a way that didn't really before how much the Sokovians are suffering. That, I mean, they treat it as a background joke in a couple of the other movies that, oh, there's more peacekeepers going to Sokovia, and the world treats it like a joke. Like this is a stereotype because it's been going on for so long, and the violence there. When they bother to think of them at all, that, ha ha, more civil unrest happened in Sokovia on the news today, change the channel to the next show. That the contrast in like Age of Ultron between the Avengers having their victory party in billionaire Tony Stark's tower versus, and the scene switches to the slums of Sokovia, that they can't change the channel. That's where they live. Sokovia isn't just a name in the news to them. And that within the story, these are real people and families and little children like the Maximov twins. But like in a Spider-Man movie, they mention, oh, and there was stuff going on in Sokovia this week, and it's like a blinker you'll miss reference. To Wanda, that's her life. When you're living like that. It's like that thing from TV tropes. But for me, it was Tuesday, is what I'm trying to say. It really hammered that home to me, that the Avengers or NATO or the Western powers, the developed countries, they have some brief military interventions in Sokovia, don't really fix any of the problems, leave, and by their next adventure, they forget about it. We're doing stuff with the Guardians of the Galaxy and having adventures and zaniness. But for the Sokovians, that is their daily life. That is normal. It's not, for me, it was Tuesday. The day the Stark Industries bombs fell on the Maximovs' home was the most important day in their lives. And in just the power of television and storytelling, I've heard about how back in the Cold War, in real life, the only American TV show that the communist dictator of Romania let air on TV there was Dallas. That soap opera about wealthy Texas oil families and catfights between and slapping and all just the soap opera hijinks. And he thought, why did he let in Dallas? He thought it would show them how decadent and corrupt the West was. That's why he let them air it. And that totally backfired. And this is a famous story. It totally backfired. Because even though in the TV show, you know, they're oil millionaires, and this is heightened from reality, it showed the Romanian people a standard of living that was totally alien. And it gave them this tiny glimpse of another world outside of their dictatorship, something they could hope for. They're like, wow, obviously these are presented as rich people, but they have really nice clothes and really nice cars. And is this what America's like? Well, kind of, but we're not waiting online for toilet paper. So it just, no, this showing that, like, it reminds me also of, I've heard that Friends is really popular with a lot of younger people today because they like that it's practically a fantasy of, there is no way these people could afford apartments as nice as they actually have with the jobs they have in Friends. But it's showing them living this wonderful life in New York City, and it's kind of become this generation's fantasy thing for that. It's like with Dallas and Romania, it's something to aspire to. That, and it hit me that it's tragic that it's, you know, I live in the New York City area, that, and it's not like my life was like Friends at all, but it's tragic that the United States and first world nations in general don't always live up to their ideals. You know, it isn't like on TV in the sitcoms that there's still poverty and corruption and all of that and bias, because even so, other countries have it a lot worse. I mean, real war zones. I mean, America has its problems, but I'm talking really third world places like Turkmenistan is not a pleasant place to live. or I don't want to name anyone else. Turkmenistan has zero YouTube presence, so I point that out a lot. But this isn't some war-torn country. This isn't South Sudan, which has active civil wars, or Yemen. Dear God, the suffering in Yemen right now. That, yeah, we have problems in the United States or in any Western power, like the UK, Australia, just in terms of like income inequality. But this is that whole immigrant thing of people hoping to escape from the war zone they're in to make a life for their family somewhere else. And that the glimpse of hope they have for that, how do they learn about America or Western Europe or other countries like that, or Japan, is, well, we see your TV shows. And we kind of base our hopes on it. Just when you see like people in like a war-torn, like, again, like Somalia, going, we see American TV and we hope that one day our children can live like in your sitcoms. Because that is a gut punch and I don't fault them for having hopes like that when you're in a really desperate position. I know I'm rambling here, it's just hard to verbalize. I hope you get my point that before, like in Age of Ultron, they just said, oh, Sokovia, it's war-torn, there's protesters, that you see, it humanized the Sokovians so much, just before the bombs even dropped. That flashback scene in WandaVision where there's people shooting outside, and they're having a TV night watching old American sitcoms, which are unrealistic, but they're zany fun, and they're happy, and they're free, and they're not in a war zone for the half hour they're watching it. And these people with love in their hearts can forget that. And you can tell they're hoping to be like, why do you... I think it was implied, Pietro mentions we're watching, part of TV night is that we practice our English. Like, were they hoping to immigrate? Were they hoping to get out of Sokovia and go somewhere else? I mean, I don't think they'd want to stay there. Why would they be trying to learn English from TV? Just from there, it might have been implied, I'm not sure, but that just how desperate and pitiful that scene was, and heartbreaking, that something you or I would throw away, like, it's an old Dick Van Dyke DVD, is magical to them. And they can forget their troubles. And related to that, another aspect of that I think they played with very well, incorporating it in the TV show, is Wanda's changing accent. Now, I felt that totally made sense in the movies, that they go at a certain point, she loses her Sokovian accent between Captain America 3, Civil War, and Avengers Infinity War. The explanation that the writers gave in interviews was, well, she was on the run and hiding out after that, so logically she trained to lose her accent so she wouldn't stand out in a crowd. Like, Natasha Romanoff is a professional spy and has learned to speak flawless English without a Russian accent. And they say she probably got help from Natasha on speech lessons. They're hiding out. She'd be actively training to not speak with an accent anymore. That made complete sense to me when they said it. I don't think that's a cheat. But in WandaVision, they took this perceived incongruence and sort of turned it into a tragic plot point. That when Wanda gets really angry and steps outside the Hex to threaten the military, she talks in her Sokovian accent. But she doesn't in her fantasy world. Why? When there's no one to judge her or anything, she is the demigoddess of her fantasy world that revolves around her, and she's still trying to speak flawless English with no Sokovian accent. And pathetically, just tragically, I think the point they implied was kind of that in her idealized fantasy life, she's not this awkward third world refugee from shithole country Sokovia. Sorry, not trying to compare anything, just that I mean, they mention she's from Sokovia, but it's sort of played for laughs that in her fantasy, in her heart of hearts, she's one of the all-American sitcom moms. I mean, but she acts, and they mention she's from Sokovia, but she acts and sounds exactly like American sitcom moms who little girl Wanda idolized, living in a war zone, watching DVDs of the Dick Van Dyke Show and Bewitched. That little Wanda didn't want to be Sokovian. She wanted to be the women, the moms on these sitcoms, American sitcoms. And I think that tragically, little Wanda here is sort of a stand-in or microcosm for all Sokovian children. Wanda doesn't want to be Sokovian. No one wants to be from Sokovia. As the saying goes, it's a good place to be from, but not a good place to be. No longer living there. That hooray, we escaped Sokovia to immigrate to a better country. And I think it's implied that through learning English, they were trying to immigrate, that they wanted to leave Sokovia. No one wants to be there. No one cares about Sokovians who are in Sokovia. No help is coming. So with Wanda herself, look at her story arc. She's suffered so much, she voluntarily joins Hydra to fight Stark and the Avengers. Because the best villains, like I said, aren't just cartoon characters. They think they're the hero of their own story. Pointing again to Black Panther's Killmonger, they did a really good job of setting him up not just as some evil arms dealer, that he suffered. He's the good guy from his point of view. He feels he's been driven to extremism, but he feels he must do it. Or in the mutant storyline, elephant in the room here, Magneto. Despite all his connections to Wanda conflicting over the years, but Magneto, in broad strokes across different continuities, the general idea of Magneto, he has reasons he does what he does. He's a mutant extremist. He said, well, I lived through the Holocaust. I have no faith that humanity can treat those different from them as equals or without fear. And they're trying to wipe us out. I have seen this before. That he isn't crazy, that there are reasons he genuinely believes what he's doing is right. So I see Wanda as, through the story that they really highlight through WandaVision, as this sort of microcosm of all Sokovians. That she was willing to voluntarily join Hydra, this fascist force like Hydra, or perhaps, in the future, Doctor Doom, if he could make them safe. That she says, well, I wanted to change the world for the better, from their point of view. Marvel has announced that a couple of years from now, a Fantastic Four movie is officially coming on their schedule, that they're going to integrate the Fantastic Four into the Marvel Cinematic Universe. So, with that confirmed, it stands to reason that Latveria will have to be introduced at some point, right? Because Doctor Doom's their main villain. And because of that, it seems that one of two scenarios is going to happen. The first is that Latveria, when not if it is introduced, is a separate country near Sokovia, also in the Balkans, and similar to comic storylines where Latveria tries to invade Transia. That because if Sokovia is the stand-in for Transia, simply renamed, that, okay, any storyline involving Latveria in a Fantastic Four movie would probably at least name drop and probably include prominently Sokovia. Like, the Fantastic Four have to stop him from invading Sokovia from Latveria, just as they're neighboring countries. But the second possibility that I've increasingly been speculating on, just been gnawing in the back of my mind since seeing WandaVision, is that they're setting up Sokovia to become Latveria. mean, obviously the name is different, but, something along the lines of that when Doctor Doom comes to power, he goes, I will rename the country to its ancestral name before the great powers started carving up territory here. Our ancient name, Latveria, or something. Or maybe the neighboring country of Simcaria will invade Sokovia in an Anschluss like Germany and Austria, Munich agreement, and he'll go, our combined countries will now have their ancestral name of this region, Latveria, playing around with renaming it that, oh, it's some name we had all along for the region, separate from Sokovia. And, of course, the out-of-universe explanation would be that Marvel wanted to keep this a secret, that they're renaming it because it was supposed to be a surprise, that they wanted you to sympathize with the Sokovians at first, not realizing they were going to turn into Latveria, to get drawn into their plight. So you can see how these suffering people in an ignored third world micronation would be so willing to actually support Doctor Doom, to see him as their hero. Because Doctor Doom would help them when the rest of the world ignores them. And a couple of movies have done that they don't reveal a character's supervillain name right away, but let you get to know them first and sympathize with them, then reveal, oh, they're that villain from the comics. The name is slightly different. And yes, this would be different from the mainstream Marvel Comics continuity where Sokovia is a new, different country from Latveria. I'm talking about the Marvel Cinematic Universe continuity, okay? Where they're free to play around with that as a separate canon. And I just thought of this watching WandaVision. That was my big takeaway, other than just sitting there sobbing and crying, thinking of just the emotional journey of just how sad everything was. I really thought Wanda was... she's this character you want to be good and have a happy ending, but there were points where she was just, when she's in the street, desperately going, but I'm a good person. I wasn't hurting you. I'm trying to be good, and I'm trying to keep you safe, and just she's unraveling, and everything with Vision. That's, I have nothing more to add to the character arc stuff than other channels, just I really liked it. But the one thing I really had as a question in that, it wasn't, I don't normally speculate on this kind of thing. I don't normally report on Marvel stuff. Just, it was a question that insisted itself upon me. It was gnawing at the back of my mind. I wasn't looking for a fan theory. Just, I had this sinking feeling that, are they setting up Sokovia to become Latveria? Because they made the Sokovians deeply tragic and very sympathetic in this, that you felt for their plight in this, in that flashback scene. How tragic their lives are. This little girl's parents getting killed by bombs dropping on her home on TV night. And they're pushing how almost comically dark, it's like a black comedy, how bad things are in Sokovia. Even when her mother looks out the window and sees militants actually shooting at each other, the way it's edited and paced, it's played for black comedy, for dark comedy. It isn't meant to be scary. It's almost a joke. And a few other things scattered throughout the show, like when they have the intro to their 1980s show, and it cheerfully shows photos of young Wanda smiling in the middle of graffiti-covered slums in Sokovia, this war zone, that I think they're setting up, not subverting expectations, but they're setting up a mood whiplash that, yeah, why were you laughing at these darkly comic scenes of, like, militants fighting in the streets? That Doctor Doom will come along and rebuild Sokovia as Latveria and point out all the suffering you saw on the nightly news in Sokovia, and then you got to change the channel on after a good laugh. That wasn't a funny, dark comedy joke. These were ruined lives and destroyed dreams. But I'm going to give them hope again by turning Sokovia into Latveria. And, like, I've seen other movies and miniseries doing this very well. Things that talk about the rise of Nazi Germany and stuff. That people didn't just walk around one day and go, I think it would be fun to support fascists. Like, the best movies I've seen on the rise of fascism and stuff, they start with, post-World War I Weimar Germany in the 1920s and showing people were literally carrying wheelbarrows of banknotes because hyperinflation had made money worthless. It wasn't worth the paper it was printed on, and showing just how terrified and hopeless the situation was, that you could see how normal people would get sucked into that. So when the Nazis came along and said, we are going to fix everything, the rest of the world doesn't care about you, and we are fixing everything, look how strong we are again with militarism, people would actively, not just go along with it, but actively support it. That they're making us safe and strong again and embrace it. That in the comics, Latveria genuinely likes Doctor Doom. So Sokovia is this comically weak country, not even a country. I mean, in Civil War, Zemo, who is a Sokovian, openly calls it a failed state, which is just anarchy. That, I mean, and they mention in the tie-in comics, they openly say, oh yeah, there's revolutions on literally a monthly basis in Sokovia. It's not a prolonged civil war between two factions. It's just the next junta coming into power. There's nothing left to fight for, and if they're that desperate, it's not even a civil war, it's anarchy. That if they're that desperate and pitiful and frightened, that they're setting up to show us how they would embrace a strong man like Doctor Doom. I'm not sure. It's just that one scene before the bombs even drop, and showing just how bad things are in Sokovia, and this isn't a joke, these are real people with lives. I just kept thinking that, and it turns out this has been a fan theory for a while. It's been a fan theory since Age of Ultron came out in 2015 of, we'd never heard of Sokovia before. We think it's Transia, but wait a minute, is this your version of what's going to be Latveria? And if you Google around enough, you'll see there were theories about this floating around. I didn't believe in them until now. I had heard of that. Like, yeah, they're not really going to do that. Just up until the moment I saw that scene in WandaVision and went, I get the increasing feeling that they're setting up Sokovia to become Latveria. That they're showing just how bad things are there. I'm not sure. What do you guys think? That's interesting. I look forward to the comments. Specifically, we know that the Fantastic Four and Doctor Doom are coming, presumably also including Latveria. So, do you think Latveria will try to invade Sokovia in the upcoming Fantastic Four movie? Like how Latveria invaded Transia in the comics? Or, tell me in the comments here, do you guys suspect that there's at least a chance that they're slowly setting up Sokovia to turn into Latveria, to get us to sympathize with and see how they could turn to that? Another question for you guys is, how is Wanda Maximoff, the Scarlet Witch, going to play into this? She has the power of a demigoddess. Will she try to use, now that she's this powerful, is she just going to hang around the Avengers, or is she going to try to use her power to, fix Sokovia so people don't keep dying there? Now that she's this powerful, wouldn't she want to go back to Sokovia? And could that be a bad thing? That's another question. What if she tries to take over Sokovia like she did Westview, but not fantasy, but just, well, I want to fix everything so there aren't civil wars anymore, but almost the way Killmonger did, that, well, she's trying too hard. I mean, is she on Wundagore Mountain in that final scene? I'm pretty sure that was Wundagore Mountain in Sokovia. Where else would she go? But what do you guys think about these questions? We shall see. Plus, Falcon and the Winter Soldier is coming up 2 weeks from now. And I'm going to try to get to talking about that if they touch on Sokovia again. So, actually, Falcon and Winter Soldier was supposed to be the first tie-in show on Disney Plus, but due to COVID, it got pushed back behind WandaVision and they aired out of order. I don't know if that'll really affect anything, but Falcon and Winter Soldier is coming up, and if there's big stuff after that show, please subscribe so you don't miss my thoughts on that when they come out. And just other theories going around with this. as the news comes out. So you don't miss out on any of my future thoughts, please subscribe and stick around.